Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Core 1 review. And this is Mike Katzman. I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's session. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. This is great. Before we get started, I'd like to just do a quick sound check. If you can hear me, please let me know. And also, if you're able to see your screen, also let me know just by saying, hey, the video quality is 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. If it's a little quiet, let me know. We can kind of work around that. Also, before I get started, I'd like to just explain the purpose of the class today and what we're going to be walking through. We're going to, what we're going to be doing, and I'll also kind of just walk you through what you are supposed to sort of do as part of the whole process. Okay, so I'm going to try to just help you understand what you need to cover. Okay, and I guess what you can expect from the Core 1 process. Just want to see if there's any, if you're able to hear me, please let me know through the chat. There's going to be a chat on the right side of your page or at the bottom of the page, depending on how you have your page configured and whether you're on a mobile device or whether you're on your computer. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so people are able to follow along. That's great. Also, I'd like to just understand before we get started, where are people at? So where's everyone at in terms of, are you writing the Core 1 exam next week? Have you attempted it before? Is this your first time writing it? Or are you just here for a completely different reason? Please let me know in the chat as well. I'd be happy to kind of get started from there once I understand where everybody is. And, we can kind of take it from there. So where's everyone at? Are you writing the Core 1 exam? Have you attempted it before? Where's everyone, kind of going to here? So let me just kind of wait a few more seconds here. I'd like to understand where everybody is, and then we get started. Okay, perfect. So it looks like a number of you have the exam or that you're writing for the first time next week. So you've come to the right place. I want to help you as much as I possibly can, and it's my it'd be my pleasure to help you understand also the key tested areas and things that you should watch out for. Okay, so let's get started, and we'll kind of keep this engaging and fun. Also, feel free to communicate with me through the chat throughout the whole session. Also, this session is being recorded. You can go back to it at any time. You can replay it, etc. Okay, so without ado, quick webinar disclaimer. And I'm your session leader for today. This is Mike Katzman. I'm the course director at Prep Formula. Previously, I was an independent contractor for CPA Canada and a National Center marker. So for those of you that don't know what the National Center is, the National Marking Center is where exams are marked. It's a central facility run by CPA Canada, and it's essentially all exams are marked by the National Marking Center. Please also note that National Marking Center people are different from your facilitators. So facilitators do not mark the exams. Okay, I repeat, the people that may have been teaching you stuff so far as part of your CPA career in the modules have generally not marked the exams. And the reason why this is done this way is there's an independence barrier between people who teach and people who mark, and that kind of makes sense. There's all sorts of controls that are in place as part of the process. So it is absolutely critical to make sure that kind of, goes without a hiccup. Okay. And then I've had some experience for a number of years marking for York, and York University, which is a university in Toronto, and with my old firm, EY. Why Prep Formula? For those of you that have never heard of us, or maybe this is your first class with us, we provide a supplementary personalized training program for students going through CPA PEP, and we pair students with CPA markers on a one-to-one basis. So you'll get a chance to work with a marker unless you just take a class with us. That's okay as well. But we do offer one-on-one assistance as well. We're a designated post-secondary educational institution, and we've been the largest and most trusted CPA prep program in Canada based on site traffic from 2015 to date. So thank you for all that. Again, let me kind of just walk you through a couple of small and I think important things. So Core 1 will obviously include the multiple choice and the case portion. I want to tackle both today. So first of all, from a multiple choice perspective. So how do you do well on multiple choice? First of all, try to practice as much as you possibly can. You've probably had enough exposure to multiple choice questions. So my advice is try to time yourself. Okay, it's critical that you time yourself. If you're using formula questions, make sure that you time yourself and you know, with some kind of a clock, etc. Our system though will automatically time your attempt as well. So you will get a chance to actually go through and be able to time what you're doing at any given moment, which is great. If you're using the module questions, that's okay as well, but make sure that you, again, you put in the effort to actually time like yourself, so you're sticking to all the timelines. And over the weekend, next kind of 48 hours or so, try to simulate 1 or 2 quizzes. Try to get more comfortable with the whole process. Okay. Generally speaking, you always want to pick the right answer. I often get a question like, how do I pick multiple choice questions? It's hard. It's not easy, my advice for you is not to try to look at the multiple choice answers and try to calculate backwards. That doesn't really work. Instead, try to actually solve the problem. Try to solve the question at hand. Don't kind of peek ahead, because CPA Canada on purpose plants answers that are wrong into the multiple choice. So don't jump ahead. You gotta be able to kind of find out, the answer to the question at hand. Also, don't look for patterns. There are no patterns, okay? Like, this is not a high school exam where a teacher can override the process and put, all C's or the majority of C's. The exam questions will be very carefully weighted to make sure that there's no, extra C's or extra D's or B's or whatever in the pool. So, you got to just answer the question that's provided and focus on the best answer, okay? This is a highly standardized process, so I just have to inform you not to look for certain patterns and, follow myths, etc. Also, try to relax. Multiple choice should, in general, come second, okay? And by the way, for those of you that have attempted practice quizzes and practice exams, do you generally, or for those of you that have attempted the exam before, and actually it looks like most of you are writing for the first time. Yeah, okay. So never mind. But in general, what I wanted to say is you should always consider doing the case first before the multiple choice. If you run out of time on the multiple choice, you can quickly guess, right? You can quickly go back and kind of figure it out. And then you can fill in the blanks, randomly. However, with a case, you're only provided with so little time. So if you, finish it halfway, then you probably failed the exam right there. So you can't do it. You can't rush through the case later on. So my advice is do the case first. Okay. Also, don't contemplate life choices if it quote unquote doesn't go well. It's a standardized exam. So just, understand, try to read everything slowly, calculate fast, and make sure that you understand what's being asked of you at all times. Lastly, my biggest tip for you on multiple choice is remind yourself what competency area you're working with. Okay, remind yourself what competency area you're working with. What I'm saying by this is oftentimes there might be some confusion around the way that the multiple choice questions are worded. Okay, they might be talking about a client scenario. Like, client X is doing the following. Now, remind yourself which competency area you're working on, because don't get trapped in the information supplied to you by the question. Focus instead on trying to understand, is this a financial, reporting issue? Is it an assurance issue? Is it a tax issue? And from there, try to understand where you're operating, right? Is it an FR issue? Is it assurance, etc.? Okay. And then remind yourself kind of what you're doing. Last but not least, consider the weight of the exam. Remember, this is technically a 4-hour exam. And if you remember, 50 to 70% of the exam mark, 50 to 70% of the exam mark is allocated to financial reporting. So what area should you do the best in? Well, of course, it's FR. You see? So if you're ever running out of time, maybe run out of time on tax or finance, but never, ever run out of time on financial reporting. That is the easiest way to fail the exam. Do you see my point? So always try to prioritize. Now, from a case perspective, we often teach something called the Rodak method. The Rodak method prepares you better and allows you to write the cases on a computer. So before I actually kind of move on here, for those of you that have practiced cases, first of all, please let me know in chat, when you practice cases, do you time yourself or not? Okay, when you practice cases, do you time yourself or not? And the second question that I have is, do you use a computer or a paper outline? So let me know now in chat. Do you time yourself, and do you use a computer or paper outline? Okay, let me just see. Let me just take approximately a minute or so just to get the answers. So again, folks, what I'm looking for is, are you using a computer or paper outline? And do you time yourself when you do the questions? Or do you allow yourself 8 hours to complete the practice cases? At least so far. What have you done? Okay, there we go. So I expected people to say that they don't time themselves. And I also expected a lot of people to say that they use paper. And it's kind of split. There's some people that are saying that they use paper. Some people are saying computer. Some people are saying that they actually do time themselves and use a computer. So ultimately, the answer that I was kind of hoping to get was you time yourself and you use a computer outline, which is wonderful. And the structure of this particular class, and I'll just kind of explain from here. So we're going to go through the Rodak method, which is kind of the preferred way to write that we suggest. And by the way, the case is sort of what sets people apart on the exam, in my opinion, because the multiple choice comes down to your knowledge. And if you watch a lot of our other classes, or if you read our notes, which very closely mimic the exam, you'll do very well. So you'll never have an issue with the multiple choice. It is not an issue for the majority of our students. But what's difficult is case writing, especially because the majority of candidates, and confirmed by this chat, as well, the majority of candidates in Core 1 do not actually time themselves until they get to the exam. So the first thing that I would suggest is try to time yourself. Try to give yourself only 60 minutes and see how you do in a case. You will notice that you will struggle significantly. So again, what I want to show you tonight is how do you do it under 60 minutes? How should you plan your response? So we're going to do all that. And I will certainly provide you with a lot of information to help you make the best decision possible. So, you will definitely have the right skills and tools to do it going forward. Okay. So, basically Rodak starts with reading cases. You always print, you always absorb, you try to spend approximately 25 to 30% of the allocated time reading. Never go through the reading portion too quick. Now, when you're reading, try to look for assessment opportunities, which I call requireds. A required or an assessment opportunity is a section, it's a collection, or what I call a bucket of marks. So each individual bucket is separate from other buckets. And if you spend too long in one area, you'll score worse in another. So a perfect candidate is one that attempts everything. Okay? A perfect candidate is one that attempts everything, but potentially doesn't really complete, everything on the exam. So it's kind of like you're better off doing a mediocre job, okay, a mediocre job in all areas compared to an amazing job in one. Also, we'll talk about the computer versus paper outline. In my opinion, you need some kind of an outline, some kind of a plan to keep you organized. And the majority of the time that you have should go towards case writing, okay? Because we talked, say, 25% of time, say, 15 minutes, should go towards reading. The other 45 should actually go towards writing. Potentially, you could run a little bit into your multiple choice time, but still, you have to manage your time. The computer will kind of keep you more organized, and I'll explain how to do that in a second. The next stage is, as you're reading information, as you're reading paragraphs, my advice is try to take the information that you're reading and divide it into competency areas. So what do I mean by that? What the hell does that even mean? I get it. Okay, I get it, folks. Like I get that this is kind of confusing. But what you ideally want to read, what you ideally want to do is just read a sentence. Okay, you read a sentence and you ask yourself, what competence area does this belong to? And it might be something like, I think they're talking about tax. I think they're talking about FR. And this is how you identify stuff. So I've given you a couple of identification factors, right? Audits, assurance. FR is like accounting problems, weaknesses, I record everything as an expense. I don't ever capitalize anything, right? Like you might have that kind of information from the controller, for example. Finance, numerical quants, right? Numbers, etc., all that sort of stuff. Tax, both corporate, personal, right? They might ask you for some advice. And then, that's basically it. And then my advice is once you figure out each individual competency area and you group them into your computer outline, then you apply the preferred format. So for assurance, there's a couple of them, and I'll list a couple. So you'll jot down these formats: ICR, where you introduce the issue, the criteria, and then you recommend, or RAMP for audit planning memos. So you discuss the risks, the approach, the materiality, and then procedures. Or RAP, for example, for perfecting a procedure and writing the best procedure imaginable, where you cover the risk covered, the assertion, and then the procedure itself. WIR for controls, RLPUC for special engagements. Okay. Please note that this is not meant to be a complete list of every single format imaginable. My advice is just to try to think about formats whenever possible and try to kind of put them together whenever you can, because it will help you keep organized. And for FR, there's 6 steps: identification, analysis, correct treatment, recommendation, impact, and then potentially a tie into other competency areas. For finance, consider doing like a small quant, maybe 3-5 years, cash in versus cash out. You must use present value and you have to have a conclusion. And then for qualitative, kind of pros and cons is perfect. Recommend certain things and also always conclude on like the majority of, basically combine the quant and the qual together and write something like overall based on financial and non-financial factors, aka quantitative and qualitative. You should do the following. You see? Perfect. And then management accounting, CCAR, identify the criteria, like the relevant rule, the case facts, is it correct or not? Alternatives, if there's any alternatives for recording, and then recommend the one particular method or treatment. Okay, that's kind of like an idea here. I'm getting a quick question here before we move on to the last section, which is conclusion. If we get finance, for example, discussion of cash flow, would we get the format, or do we need to know it in our head? Generally speaking, for any discounted cash flow, what you want to do is just look at very simply like cash in versus cash out. They should tell you some basic information, and they should kind of give you some kind of a discount factor, discount rate, etc. Like it should be available for you. You might have to dig through the case. Like they won't give you like a clear table. Okay, they won't give you a clear table showing, input all this information. So for example, the discount factor, might be, for example, they might tell you, the objective of our firm is to earn 8% a year. And then you kind of have to plug that 8% in. So always try to highlight numbers and it'll kind of help you identify what those are. But in general, try to think of the easiest quant possible. To me, like cash in versus cash out is perfect. Okay. Also make sure that you always conclude and try not to spend way too much time in this area. Try to also allocate. So also, Therese, please note that 50% of your mark will always be allocated to the qualitative portion and 50% will be allocated to the quant. So there's always kind of those two components. Okay, and then last but not least, I always talk about the big picture. It's not relevant for every single case. However, the big picture is a particular discussion point. It's a reason for why you're writing a case. It's a point in the case. And what do I mean by that? So CPA Canada calls this the enabling competencies. You have to be able to read in between the lines and kind of figure out what's the point of the case? Like, you might be reading about a bunch of control failures and some misappropriation of assets, and FR is all messed up, and then you do the quant and it's not looking good. Well, what does that mean, right? What's the big picture? Well, maybe there's bankruptcy, maybe there's a going concern. You see, you always want to think about, like, what if you were to add up all the AOs together, what would that mean? So my advice is always to get into the habit of trying to get into, or I guess trying to leave some kind of a conclusion. It's not really required for Core 1, but it wraps up all of your discussions very neatly and also explains to the marker that you are very competent in understanding the enabling competencies, and you're weaving all the information together. Okay, so I call it like a summarized conclusion of all the problems basically that you identify, or the main problem in the case. That's the C part of RODAC. Okay, so there's a couple of other things that I want to cover today. Okay, so we're about a half an hour in. I know time flies. It's crazy. So one of the things that you probably want to think about now is a very basic technical review. And I have uploaded the slides. They're available. If you click back now and if you click webinar materials, they're going to be in a folder. So you don't have to rush to write this stuff down. I also uploaded the case along with the answer. It'll be available. But what I want to do here is I want to cover some of the technical areas. I'm not going to read everything on the slide. It doesn't make sense. But I want to spend like 10, 15 minutes going through the areas that I think are really important and the ones that have appeared very frequently on previous exams. That's the purpose of all this. I'm going to just identify things that I think are relevant. I'm not going to go through them a lot, okay, because that's something that's like really critical. So you definitely want to, make sure. Sorry, I'm just, please refresh. Okay, so the very first step that we're going to have is revenue recognition. Okay, revenue recognition is the very first. Hey folks, are you able to actually see my presentation? Just out of curiosity, I'm getting a complaint here from someone saying that they're not actually able to see what I'm presenting. Wait, so this whole time you didn't actually see the presentation? That's crazy. I'm going to just shut her down here. Oh, wow. Okay, sorry, you should have warned me that you couldn't see the presentation. Oh my, I apologize. I had no idea that you weren't able to see it. Only sound. Okay, folks, yeah, because I was covering a whole bunch of information. Just bear with me a moment here. It looks like just like a technical difficulty. For some reason, the slide wasn't advancing. There we go. Let me know if you can see it now. So we talked about all this. We talked about kind of advancing and moving forward. So you should now see things changing. Okay, we talked about starting points, etc. That's funny. The voice. Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, I'm glad that you kind of understood it, but I also want to show you. Okay, so I just want to kind of rewind a little bit. So again, this is doing well on multiple choice. It's pretty much everything that I just covered. So there's really nothing here, right? We've covered all this. And by the way, the slides are available for you as well. This is RODAC, right? Reading, organizing, dividing into competency areas, applying preferred formats, and then concluding. Okay, we talked about all this, and then we went through, and sorry, these are the examples of the different AOs. They're available here, dividing into different like competency areas. That's what you had on your screen. And then we move now to applied formats, ICR. This is an applied format. This is another one. This is another one, right? RAP, WIR, etc. are all puck. Okay, folks, and then we have the FR format with how we discuss, and then we kind of jump ahead, the financing stuff, the tax, CCAR criteria, case facts, alternatives, recommendation. It's all here, right? Like we cover this. I know I've spoken a lot about this, okay? I've spoken about the conclusion, but just wanted to let you know that this is basically what we already covered. Now, the next step here, as I mentioned, what is going to be a quick technical review. These are all subjects that have appeared before on the exam. So I want you to pay pretty close attention to it. Is this a complete list of everything? No, it is not. That's not my point. That's not my point at all. But what I instead want to help you with is just to get a basic understanding of the main areas that I think you should definitely know. So I would say this will probably cover about 70% of your exam. Now, please note, I'm not going to go through extreme levels of detail here. This is meant to kind of just say, okay, well, do I understand it or do I not? Right? This is meant to just give you some information. It is not meant to provide you with a whole bunch of other stuff, right? It's not meant to kind of give you a lot of other things that, you would find really confusing. So that's why I just want to make sure that, we're on the same page there. Okay, folks. So let me just go through them. I'm not going to read the slides. Okay, here, for example, this is going to be the first one. I want to, you will have this available for you. Instead, what I want to actually do with you today, after we go through all the technical subjects, is I'd like to actually tackle a case with you today. Okay, so I'll do a case live, and we're going to tackle one under time constraint, and hopefully we can try that maybe in the second hour. Okay, folks? So we're going to try to maybe run through something right now for about 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to do a case together. And then the case will be timed. I will show you how to approach the case and help you get a sense of what you have to do. Okay? Just to kind of give you an idea of where you'll have to be. Okay? Any other questions so far? Any other questions at all? Just want to see if there's anyone. No questions at all. Just want to see if anyone's on the same page or not. Okay, folks. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so let's get started. Revenue recognition is probably the most important subject on the entire Core 1 exam. This is something that you will absolutely have to know. So ASPE is the main standard. You'll probably see most of it. IFRS is the other. So RevRec starts first of all with performance, and then performance is achieved when all risks and rewards of ownership have transferred. And you've got assurance over measurement of the consideration. And in general, we look for a bunch of things like persuasive evidence, delivery, and that the price is fixed and determinable. Okay. Later on, for services instead of goods, we use the percentage of completion or the completed contract method. You should also be very cognizant of IFRS 15 and the 5-step model, right? Where you identify the contract, the transaction price, the performance like obligations, and then recognize the revenue when you can. I have a specific class that looks at revenue recognition in its entirety. If you're worried about RevRec and you don't quite understand revenue recognition, please watch the class separately. It will teach you a lot more than what I plan to cover today. And the reason for that is, again, it's really difficult to cover everything imaginable here. Because I can spend 3 hours, 4 hours talking about revenue alone. So again, I don't really want to get into that level of detail. But again, if you identify revenue to be a problem within your overall preparation strategy and you don't get something, like you don't understand something, go ahead and pull up the class on RevRec, right? On revenue recognition, and it will give you a much better understanding of where you have to be. Anyway, okay, so how do you account for multiple deliverables? Generally speaking, if like a machine is sold with a service contract, then you have to, allocate that separately, right? Same under ASPE versus IFRS. There's absolutely no difference whatsoever. Principal versus agent, basically you record either the gross or the net, and there's some factors that look into whether you're a principal or you're an agent. You have to definitely know that. Intangibles, first of all, you have to understand the basic definition of an intangible and be able to discuss it, which is, can you identify, can you control, can you provide, or does it provide future economic benefit? If that's the case, then we have an intangible asset. If you're developing something in-house, if you're not buying something, but if you're developing something in-house, then you have an option to either, expense it or capitalize it. And it's up to you whether you want to do one or another. Now, depending on the standard, costs are in the research phase are always expensed. And under ASPE, it allows you to either expense or capitalize development costs, outside of research. So once you actually came up with the idea and you're going to capitalize it and you're developing it, ASPE gives you a choice, capitalize or expense. IFRS says you must capitalize. There's no choice. Property, plant, and equipment. ASPE 3061, first of all, you include all the costs that are associated with bringing, preparing, getting, the equipment or the machinery or the building ready. The only difference is in ASPE, you have a choice to potentially include or exclude interest costs. Under IFRS, you have to include borrowing cost, aka interest. There are other similarities like basket purchases. If you buy multiple assets, then you have to allocate them separately. And then another big topic is minor versus major upgrades. So if you come across something that's a major upgrade and it increases the service potential, then potentially you could capitalize that amount. There's no real significant changes except IFRS provides with much more guidance around particular assets. Again, if you want to learn more about that, check out my property, plant, and equipment class, which will cover all of this. Property, plant, and equipment also has two different methods for how you record information. ASPE only allows a cost model, which is basically historical cost minus any depreciation. IFRS allows you to play around a little bit because you can either use the cost or the revaluation model. And revaluation model is basically the fair value model. Now, sometimes you have to impair a long-lived asset, like, if there's a decrease in the price, if you no longer use it, etc., you have to report for it separately. So there's something called the recoverability testing. So definitely look into this. Make sure you understand it. How you determine impairment of any kind of an asset is if the carrying amount is greater than the recoverable amount, then you go ahead and complete the impairment test. So basically, if we don't expect to use the asset for much longer, if there's all sorts of signs, then potentially it's impaired. The big difference between ASPE versus IFRS is the calculation for value of use, or the recoverable amount, aka the future cash flows, is undiscounted in ASPE and discounted in IFRS. And you can't reverse impairments under ASPE, but you could for IFRS. Government assistance is kind of another one that I've seen a lot. So current expenses potentially can be shown in income for the period. Future expenses, if you receive government assistance with future expenses, you defer and amortize into income as the related expenses occur. You can either, again, for capital projects, if you get money to build a building, you can either deduct from the fixed asset or you can amortize into income over the life of the asset. And then potentially there's a issue with cumulative additional depreciation. I'm not really going to cover that. It's pretty tricky. I don't believe that it'll be on your exam, but just please note that you do have other options. And if you want to accrue a grant for an amount that's not your receivable, potentially if you believe that there's reasonable assurance that the entity will comply with the grants, then you could go ahead and do that. How do you account for forgivable loans? If someone basically gives you a forgivable loan, well, treat it as a grant and recognize it in the period when it becomes entitled to receive it. How do you account for repayable grants? Well, account for prospectively when circumstances arise and for repayment. Generally, it works in a similar way. You can either allocate against the asset or record an income. Inventory, similar to PP&E, you have to incur all the costs. You have to bring everything into, the asset value. Basically, you have to capitalize all the costs necessary to bring the inventory to present location and condition. And again, the only difference is the borrowing cost, the interest cost. Okay, must be included in IFRS and an option under ASPE. We don't include wasted stuff, selling costs, admin, etc. And we can only use FIFO or weighted average cost, cannot use LIFO under both methods. Non-monetary transactions, generally measured at carrying amount, not fair value, if any of the following are met. And then there's a couple of rules. If you have arm's length versus non-arm's length, you must apply the related party rules. So we have to consider whether it's in the normal course of operations or not. How do you determine fair value of an asset? Well, ASPE says it's more reliably measurable of the fair value of asset given up or received, and if equal, then it's the one that's given up. Okay, IFRS is very similar in that way as well. And that's kind of the end of assurance. Any questions on assurance before we proceed to your FR? Any questions on FR before we do assurance? Just want to see if there's any other questions here. No? Okay, perfect. So I don't see any other questions. We'll just jump into assurance. I'm not going to cover this one in too much detail. CS200. Sorry, the question is from Therese. Non-monetary transactions doesn't have the 4 criterions listed like ASPE. Oh, it doesn't mean that it doesn't apply. It doesn't mean that it doesn't apply. You have to kind of just read into the slide a little bit more. There's still, we have to use the other 2 standards you mentioned. Sorry, maybe we can cover this at the end. There's actually been, if you don't quite understand non-monetary, there's actually a class on it. Again, I should have mentioned. This is just meant to be a quick review, but I'm happy to connect after the class, and I'm happy to discuss some of these very in-depth kind of questions about. Because I'm kind of brushing through it. We're not really discussing it in a lot of detail. So let's talk when if you can follow up, maybe we can discuss. Okay, I'll leave my contact details at the end of the class, and feel free to let me know. Okay, CS 200 overall objectives of an auditor. So first of all the ethical requirements, integrity, objectivity, professional competence, confidentiality, and all your professional responsibilities. Also, CS 200 tells you about professional skepticism, and that's where you kind of get the audit risk being IR times CR times DR. 210, we decide on a framework, ASPE, IFRS, or not-for-profit for any kind of an audit or review of financial statements. We send out an engagement letter, and there's no need to resend the letter unless there's new changes, increase in size of business, or change in the reporting framework. Quality control at a firm. So there has to be a partner appointed for watching quality for any engagement. There's a bunch of other requirements for this. This is a pretty complicated section. In fact, there's a Canadian Auditing Standards class if you want to look at and have more information about this. CS240, this one's tested pretty frequently. It's fraud. So they like to test fraud because it's an easy section to understand. And essentially what you would do here is you have to decide whether the risks of material misstatements are linked to fraud and whether you're finding information. And you can respond to fraud by communicating with those charged with governance. So basically you have to tell people that you found something potentially, and you have to expand your sample size. So let's say that you're doing an audit or review and you find something that's contradictory, something that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. What you'd have to do is you would actually have to reach out and try to communicate that information and dig a little bit more by conducting additional procedures. 250, you always have to follow laws as an auditor or as a reviewer. So if you find non-compliance, you have to report. So examples of non-compliance, for example, tax evasion. Let's say that you were just doing an audit or review of financial statements, but you come across tax evasion. Well, what do? Well, there could be a bunch of other things. 260, communication charged with those charged with governance. So if you ever have to discuss any important matters, they have to be able to, it to be relayed to those charged with governance. By the way, who is those charged with governance? It's your board of directors. 265, if we encounter any issues with controls or control deficiencies, then we must be able to explain them in a process. And we must be able to fix the deficiencies. And that's kind of what you do as part of doing a WIR if you've ever seen that before. So the 200 level of the CS is kind of very theoretical, right? And now we get into CS 300, which is planning and audit. So now this is kind of what you actually do. So basically planning involves audit strategy, scope, timing, direction, objectives, etc. And we're supposed to develop a plan for an audit or a review and also provide a lot of, supervision whenever necessary. We also have to keep a file, whether it's paper or like use a, commercially available tool for audits, something like Caseware, for example. Many of you might know about these kind of tools. 315, this is a kind of a very common one, identification of and assessing risks of a material misstatement. So 315 requires you to assess risk assessment procedures. You have to inquire with management, perform analytical procedures, inspect, and perform client acceptance procedures just to get comfortable with the client. Furthermore, you have to go through and identify the big risks, the big issues, and then consider the impact. Then you further on develop the materiality. Materiality is never tied to risk, and it's always based off of the users. You could potentially revise the materiality, and then when there's more than one class of transactions or accounts that's more important, then you would use something called performance materiality. CS 330, if we ever identify risk, well, we have to construct a procedure then to gather more evidence. Or, for example, we do a test of controls to measure the controls of a system or a process. And then eventually we have to gather sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to validate our understanding. Which gets us to jump directly into tax. By the way, any questions here? Any questions on Canadian auditing standards? Any questions on the CSs or CASIs? People sometimes call them CASIs. Any questions here at all? I'm gonna see you I'm gonna give you one more minute and then we'll jump ahead. It's okay. If there's no questions, then that's okay. We can move ahead. I assume that there's no questions if I don't hear from you. Perfect, folks. Let's take a look at what we have under tax. So tax is a smaller section. We have a 4-hour tax review that should help you with your exams if you're struggling. And it's available for you. If you don't know tax, we can help you. We have we have a class. It's a 4-hour class. Teaches everything that you need to know. Okay, teaches everything that you need to know. So these are the kind of things that you should kind of watch out for. I'm going to highlight some of the key ones, the ones that you have to really watch out for. But again, it's not meant to be an exhaustive list. It's just things that, you should definitely look at. Okay, so first of all, you have to always consider separate entities, right? Individuals, right, have a calendar year end. Corporations can have any year end they want. And partnerships can, must have a calendar year end if any of the partners are individuals. Trusts typically have a calendar year end as well. Partnerships, not a taxpayer, and it's instead, the net income gets calculated and then is allocated to other partners. Trusts can allocate income and capital gains to a beneficiary and receive a tax deduction for the allocation as well. Any allocated capital gains, dividends, etc., are included in the beneficiary's taxable income, not in the trust. Not in the trust's income. Okay, trusts are taxed as individuals, but do not get personal tax credits. Okay, and also taxes created upon death are testamentary trusts. And testamentary trusts can have an off calendar year end, and trusts that are not testamentary are inter vivos trusts. Okay, and generally you have a December 31 year end and taxed at the top marginal rate. Residence is also a common area. So residents of Canada must pay tax on worldwide income, and residence is different from kind of citizenship. So it's if you spend more time in a particular area, you have to report all your gross foreign income. Non-residents pay tax on Canadian employment income, business income, capital gains, and dispositions of taxable Canadian property. There's a number of different there's a number of different types of income. First of all, it could be employment income, property, business, capital gains. And you can also have negative income, aka losses. There's non-capital losses, and there's some carryback and carry forward rules there. And there's some net capital losses. Okay, business income derived from revenue, less expenses for selling goods and services. And any reasonable current expense incurred to earn business is a deductible, unless the income tax prohibits it or specifically allows it. Some expenses are not deductible, for example, reserves, and exceptions are, for example, allowance for bad debts. Meals and entertainment only at 50%. Accrued salaries are deductible if paid within 180 days from the corporation's year end. Okay. And foreign advertising aimed at the Canadian tax market can be deductible as well. Safety deposit boxes are not. Which takes us to finance. So finance is a fairly tricky, corporate finance by itself is such a large area. So I'm not going to cover finance. I instead want to just focus on, I think, what is important and things that I think we should sort of be looking at. Okay. What I first want to look at basically is the capital budgeting decision by itself. So capital budgeting or investment appraisal is the planning process for an organization's long-term investments. And essentially, capital budgeting involves cash flows, and discounted cash flows are probably the most common style of testing. I'm getting, by the way, a quick question. Is it possible to have a corporation, or a corp tax calculation in the exam? Anything is possible, but is it likely? Probably not. So I would say anything is technically possible, and you should definitely review the tax webinar. But is it likely? In my opinion, not really. Okay, not really. So I would say I'd probably not focus my time on that. Okay, folks. And basically, again, sorry, going back to the slides here, we have to estimate cash flows. Net present value is something that's very common. It's basically the difference in between any of the cash inflows and present cash outflows. So we try to discount everything back to zero. And we can accept the project if NPV is greater than zero. This is different from internal rate of return. Internal rate of return is measured based off of the internal discount factor that an investment has. So the higher the internal rate of return, the better the investment, the more likely that we want it. So basically it's the internal rate. But you might set a minimum. So certain companies set a particular minimum for their, internal rate of return for them to accept the project. So they might be only accepting projects that, that have an internal rate of return of something greater or something, smaller than a particular amount. So this can be quite different. Okay. Payback period is probably the easiest and simplest way of calculating and figuring out a particular approach. However, please note that payback period does not include any discount factor, which is why it's kind of, an easier process. So for example, a payback period would just looking at the original cash, outflow and measure that based off of how long it would take. So it's not ideal. It's not a very ideal tool. However, it is definitely available. Okay, you can generally do it. And then we get into NPV versus payback. There's, I provided an example here. I'm not going to really discuss it here, but just to kind of give you an idea. And then there's some ratios. Okay, I'll just leave the ratios here for you to cover. You can download the slides later, and you'll have an idea of some of the commonly tested ratios. Okay. What I now want to do is look at the case portion. Okay, the case portion itself. But before we do that, let me tackle a couple of questions. So if you have any questions, maybe we'll just do a quick 2-minute break. Okay, so let's do a 2-minute break. We're going to come back at approximately 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know and just jot them down, and we can take it from there. Okay, so let's get started, and let's just take a quick break. Feel free to relax, and we'll be in touch in about 2 minutes or so. Okay, and then we'll do the case. Perfect, folks. Thanks. Hey everyone, welcome back. So let's do the case together here. I don't think there's any other questions. So what you have on your screen now, I've also uploaded the same case, so you do have it available. Kind of let me know if you're able to see my screen. You should now see something that says Core 1 Mock Exam. Are you able to see that? Please let me know in the chat. So I'd like to make sure everyone's able to see that before we get going here. So please let me know. Okay, perfect. It looks like everyone's able to follow along. Wonderful. So you probably should see me moving around now. Now I'm paranoid after our earlier start here. Just have to make sure everyone's able to see it. Okay, perfect. So here's what we're gonna do today. What I have for you is I have set up a working model. So this is how you answer a case using the prep formula way of writing. And I guess what you're going to be doing here is you will slowly bridge the gap by attempting to write the same way. So before I read any memo, I usually put the words memo, to, from, you're always going to be a CPA, and then regarding something else. And then I put some kind of an introduction. In this memo, I will be discussing the following areas of concern. Okay, you see what we're doing here, like this part, all of this is the computer outline. So a computer outline is basically a fill in the blank system, aka Rodak. So that's all we're going to be doing here. We're just going to be filling in the blanks, and again, always make sure you time yourself. This is really, really critical as well. Okay, folks. And then as I'm reading, I'll start populating stuff, and I'll start using some formats, and hopefully you'll have a decent idea of what I'm doing here. Okay, so let's get started. It is January 20th, 2017. By the way, I always highlight dates and numbers. You can pick any highlighted color you want. I think green is pretty good, easy on the eyes. You're a senior auditor with Klein and Partners. Okay, you're meeting with an audit partner, Robin Klein. Okay, to discuss the year end of a new client, Doolittle's Appliances Limited, Dow. Donald Doolittle, CEO and co-owner of Dow, approached Robin 2 weeks ago about the audit, and she's then accepted the audit. Okay, so what this means is no acceptance procedures. Remember, like, you don't need to do acceptance procedures, right? It already tells you that she's accepted, right? So you don't have to redo it. Okay, Jackie, a CPA student in your firm, started planning for the engagement last week by calculating preliminary materiality at $135,000, based purely on 6.5% of net income. Jackie also performed a financial statement analysis. Okay, sure. Robin reviewed the financial statement analysis and provided review comments directly to Jackie. She hasn't had a chance to review the materiality calculation yet. Okay, I'm wondering if we're ever going to see the review comments, like something like this. Are we ever going to see this? I don't really know. It doesn't really have any information. And if she hasn't had a chance to review the materiality, then maybe you should. Okay, like basically, the whole point is you should. Okay, now here's where the requireds come in, and I'm going to highlight them. And always look for the following kind of words. Robin asked you to, okay? Has asked you to. These are the magic words, right? Robin has asked you to prepare a memo to discuss significant accounting and first of all, accounting issues and audit issues, including specific procedures to address the risk identified. Okay, whoa, hang on a sec, folks. So if you remember my previous kind of walkthrough of how we did things before, right? You probably saw in the webinar where we covered that we had to discuss, right? So in this memo, we're going to discuss the following, okay? And here it's going to be AO1 financial reporting issues, right? Audit issues, Okay, and now we're being told procedures, right? So these are things that we just read about. And then right away, we can go ahead and actually like copy and paste that in. Just remove all the formatting. So this is what I mean about a computer outline. You're basically just separating out your future answer. And then, you know, if you remember, I provided you with a format for how to do this stuff, right? Like, I think we talked about this. So we've discussed what a FR format was. So you'll kind of just plug in the format here. And potentially we might have, I don't know, 3 different topics, right? Three different things to talk about. And then potentially there's going to be some audit issues, right? We don't really know exactly what format that should be in, but we know the procedure one, right? Which is going to be RAP. So we're going to go RAP like this, right? Risk assertion procedure, risk assertion procedure. You see that? And I'll maybe bold the main areas so it's easy for you to visualize. Now, I don't really know, don't know format yet, right? Because we don't have any information here so far. Oh, sorry, folks. Don't know any format yet. Have no idea what to do here. But this should kind of give you an idea. Okay. So, and by the way, for those of you that are probably wondering, where are these formats coming from, right? We talked about them. So just wanted to say, yeah. So yeah, basically that's kind of what I wanted to first explain. Okay. Further, she would like you to have an assessment of DAO's internal controls. So that's another AO, right? An assessment of DAO's internal controls. Okay, cool. So that's the other AO. Robin has provided you with background on DAO, interviews, and all this other stuff. Okay, cool. So in addition to doing that, we also have to do some kind of an assessment here. Okay, folks. So we're going to go AO4. First of all, it's going to go like this. AO4, internal control assessment, right? And then we're going to copy and paste this internal, report, internal control assessment. And then we're going to go, case is not on display. Right, sorry, I'm just kind of going back here and I'm just putting weakness, implication, recommendation. So all I'm doing here, folks, right, you saw the case previous here. There was additional information here. And all I have done was I moved and I put another AO here. I'm just going to keep it consistent, have it all Arial, so it's formatted the same way, right? So this is my internal control assessment. I'm glad you're all paying attention, though. I see some people couldn't see for a while. I apologize, but at least I know you're all paying attention, which is good. Okay, you see, this is the computer outline itself. So the computer outline, and I'm going to upload this as well. The computer outline basically is like a fill-in-the-blank model, right? So I have so far, the only area that I don't know is this audit issues piece. So I don't really know exactly what we're going to do there. But because we don't have any information, so we'll actually have to look at it. But for the majority of the AOs, right, we can probably figure out exactly what we have to already do, right? So again, folks, this paragraph over here gave us all the AOs and on all the things that we have to do, right? Robin asked you to prepare a memo discussing the significant accounting and audit issues, okay, including procedures. She would like you to include an assessment of DAO's internal controls. Cool. The rest is her telling you where you can find it. You see that? Perfect. So now what I like to do is just maybe skim through and see where everything else. So we have a background memo, Exhibit 1. We have notes from meeting with Donald, notes from meeting with Rob, and we have financial statements. So I like to start off with the financial statements, just kind of see how the company's doing. Revenue is actually increased, expenses also increased. Net income decreased. Okay, so despite a revenue increase, we had a net income decrease. Okay, then we have some website capitalization costs as a note. That probably will mean that we have to do something there. And then we get provided with limited balance sheet, okay, some cash flow, and you can see what's happening. Always try to compare and see if there's any differences. Well, the accounts receivable is really growing like crazy. That's generally not a good sign, right? And the rest is accounts payable is decreasing. So they're getting worse at collecting, but they pay quicker. So it's creating cash flow issues. But they're fairly healthy. Like as a company, they're fairly healthy. There's no real problems per se. And as you can see up here, they have some new information here, right? So they have some new revenue lines for these flash freezers. So we're going to talk more about that. And as you can see, basically wholesale is the majority of their business. Okay, cool. Now let's make some sense of the other, exhibits, and we'll kind of talk about them. In 1974, Nate Doolittle founded Dal, a home appliance manufacturing company located in Kingston. Dal's reputation was very important to Nate, who valued quality and customer service above all else. Over the years, the home appliance industry expanded significantly and became more competitive. Five years ago, in response to the industry challenges, Dal decided to reduce its product line and began specializing in niche products while maintaining its focus on customer relationships and quality. Okay, in 2006, Nate Doolittle retired and transferred ownership of Dal directly to his children, Donald, Rochelle, and Brent. Okay, so if I could just draw something here, let's highlight what we need to highlight and leave everything else. So 5 years ago, we reduced the product line. Now we only do niche products. Nate retired, and there's 3 kids. Donald, Rochelle, Brent. Rochelle is a family doctor. Brent is a chef. And limited involvement, except for annual meetings. Okay? At the annual meeting, the financial statements are presented by Donald. So Donald basically works in the business. Brent and Rochelle focus on the revenue figures, asking many questions about changes and fluctuations. Annual dividend payments are made at this time. 3 years ago, Dow launched a highly anticipated product called the Flash Freezer. This is a specialized product that is able to freeze items 4 times faster than conventional freezers, resulting in frozen food that's better tasting because fewer nutrients are lost during the freezing process. Okay. In its first year on the market. And by the way, first of all, so remember on the Road Act, like you're supposed to figure out what are we even talking about. So let's try to break this down. We have a new product, okay, is able to freeze products quicker. What does this mean? I mean, a new product to me means PP&E from FR, also means risk to company, assurance, right? Because there's new information. And obviously there's some kind of a problem here. In its first year on the market, demand for flash freezers skyrocketed, and Dow decided to cut all other product lines. So basically, they've changed the whole business around on this new product. Dow currently employs 180 people. Until 2016, its customer base consisted of large retail firms that purchased the flash freezers on a wholesale basis, and restaurants and other food producers and other custom versions of the freezers. In early 2016, in an effort to improve the sales, Dow decided to expand its e-commerce by developing a website to sell freezers directly to retail customers. The website became fully operational in April 2016, has been quite successful, significant offsetting declining margins. So this to me is the controls, right? Remember, the control environment is going to be linked to the website. This is another part, assurance here, risk. So all the stuff about like the customer base, all that, is all going to be assurance risk, right? Okay. Recently, Brent and Rochelle expressed an interest in selling shares in Dow to Donald. They began negotiations and have agreed that the purchase price is based on a multiple of 2016 earnings would be acceptable. 2016 audit is a direct result of this pending sale. Okay. So now we understand why. And again, we have the risk, right? Audit. So we're now being told that the audit's being done just because of the sale. 2016 audit. Brent and Rochelle requested the audit. Donald reluctantly agreed that it'd be a good idea. Okay, I see. Perfect. So now we're being kind of told about this multiple, but a question that I have, for example, is what is it? So what is the multiple? Okay. Which, by the way, could be like potentially finance, right? Like this is, possibly finance. And we go to the next exhibit. Donald would like to take the company public at some point. As such, Dow transitioned to IFRS in 2015 to realize the goal. Donald plans to put a strategic plan together after he buys out Rochelle and Brent. He doesn't feel like going through the hassle of obtaining approval for the plan. Realizing that the business and control environment has changed over the last years, Donald asked for an assessment of Dow's internal controls. Okay, cool. Well, I mean, we covered all this stuff already, right? Like the assessment of the internal controls, right? This was already NAO. Okay, since 2014, when Brent requested that Donald's son Simon be let go of the company, there's been an increasing level of tension between the owners. Brent didn't think it was fair that Simon received a job at Dow while his children did not. Okay, so obviously there's some kind of rough, I guess there's something going on between the owners. During the last half of 2016, Dow began selling contracts. And by the way, all this is, assurance as well, right? So obviously from an audit perspective, these are all audit issues. During the last half of 2016, Dow began selling maintenance contracts. By the end of the year, Dow sold 200 maintenance contracts. 2-year contracts for $2,500 each. So basically what this means is $1,250 per year. Right? The accounting system is tracking both the parts and labor costs associated with maintenance servicing as part of the component of the cost of sales to keep in running order. Flash freezers require maintenance every 3 months. Okay, wait a second. So we have an asset that requires maintenance every 3 months. Dow sells the maintenance contracts for regular servicing. Who place custom orders? He presented the idea to Brent and Rochelle, who were initially hesitant. They were concerned that customers would not be required to pay for the contract until the end of the term. However, after some convincing, Donald obtained their approval. So first and foremost, this component over here becomes a FR perspective, right? Financial reporting, revenue. Can you recognize this or not? Okay, last year's Donald's son Simon incorporated Compressors Inc., a manufacturing company that produces freezer compressors. Simon was able to set up CI. With financial assistance from Donald, compressors are a key part of the production of freezers. Dow currently purchases all compressor required for the manufacturing blast freezers from CI. Okay, so despite having all the issues up here, he's circumvented, right? He circumvented this whole process, right? By having his son work together. So this becomes an FR related parties, right? Like, is this fair? Is it fair? First of all, is this fair? Okay, salespeople at Dow are responsible for managing client relationships with wholesale and custom order customers. Until recently, salespeople were paid based on fixed salary scale. When Nate founded Dow, he wanted to create a no-pressure sales environment for his customers and therefore did not pay any commissions. However, the industry's changed, and in order to retain the top-performing salespeople, Donald decided to add a commission component to the salespeople's compensation. As such, salespeople receive a 5% commission based on signing. Okay, so we have to account somehow for this. So again, this is a revenue recognition, gross versus net, right, under FR. Okay, same time, the website was developed, Dow upgraded its computer system, purchased top-line accounting software that improved the tracking of sales, accounts receivable, and inventory. Dow performed significant testing on the system. When it was implemented, Donald was satisfied with the system accuracy, and as such, he decided to reduce the number of inventory counts performed. Okay, so from monthly to quarterly, as a goodwill gesture, who were complained about having to work over the holidays, he decided not to perform a December 31 count. So that was going to be our AO4. Remember all the internal controls. So obviously this is a failure. So you see every paragraph here is scrambled. Everything is just completely jumbled. There's so much information, but it's hard to understand what to add where. And there seems to be like just too much information, period, to focus on. And that's a really good thing to practice a case like this because it's so confusing, right? Like there's just so much information. And I kind of like it because there's just a lot of stuff for us to work with. So let's first of all maybe go here for a second and we'll start filling in a couple of points here. So the first topic that I'm going to cover here is maintenance revenue, right? Those contracts, right? Basically the $1,200 per year contracts, right? So those things we have to cover, and remember this is going to be IFRS 15. Okay. The second part is going to be the compressors. So we have to consider the related party. So related parties. Okay. Perfect, right? So we're going to have to figure that out. Next, we don't really have any other information about pretty much anything else. However, what I am potentially seeing here is this website, right? We've been told that there's potentially websites. Let's just kind of keep reading and we'll see where this is and what we can also include here. And I'm starting to also understand what to do here. So this is basically financial statement risks, right? So we've identified so many different risks here, right? So if you scroll down here, we've identified so many risks. We've been covering so many different risks here. And what I kind of want to look at is factors that increase risk, factors that decrease risk. And then we're going to basically go like point 1, A, B, C. Okay? Same goes for this point. We're going to go, A, B, C. You see what I'm doing here? I'm just, kind of putting in the whole walkthrough. And then remember, folks, that we were also told about a materiality. So I want to bring in the materiality that we talked about. And here I want to talk about the users, base, and calculation. So what are we going to kind of use there? Does it make sense? Does it not? Etc. Okay. And potentially we may have to also look at other things. For example, again, we are performing this work for other reasons, but so far this is what I've seen, at least so far. Obviously there's some issues with other areas. And then for the procedures, we can do it based off of revenue, right? Here, I'm just going to change the font color just so it's all consistent. Right? We can change it based off of the revenue, for example, right? We can do a procedure based off of related parties, right? Inventory, freezers. So we've talked a lot about these. And then internal control environment is something that we've kind of started talking about, right? And we're going to talk about the internal control environment by itself. But let's first look at other things. Like we don't have any information about this part. But you see, we've started to fill in the blanks. We've started to at least add information in here. So let's go back into our case and we'll continue reading. So last but not least, we have this exhibit here, right? Wholesale and custom orders, maintenance sales are entered directly into the system by salespeople. Okay, the system then tracks the order, tracking progress, and each customer has a different specifications. DAL does not maintain a master list for custom sales. Okay, so I'm just going to highlight problems, and these become basically AL4, right? This is your WIR, internal control weaknesses. So there's some discretion on pricing. Okay, salespeople provided with discretion on pricing. Revenue is not recorded until approved by Donald. Okay, what if Donald's away, for example? Credit is only offered to wholesale and custom order customers. Retail are required to pay at the time of ordering using credit cards. At the same time, improve customer relationships. Salespeople are responsible for setting credit limits. Okay, so that's another problem. Approval is only required for wholesale customers. Each part is taken out of inventory, moved into production. The manufacturing staff scan the item. System is updated automatically based on scanning process. Manufacturing staff are also required to sign in and out of each shift using a computer in the warehouse. If a staff member is working on a custom order, project details must be ordered when they sign out for the day. System uses this to update production costs for direct labor, and inventory generally fluctuates from 400,000 to 900,000. And an inventory write-up is usually used when inventory is counted. Now, you see, why is it only custom orders that are tracked? What happens to not custom? What happens to retail? What happens to wholesale? Right? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And warehouse manager is responsible for all purchases. Anything over $500 there must be a PO created. One copy is sent to the vendor, other copy is sent to the accounts payable clerk. Okay, how about a third copy potentially? When an invoice is received, it's matched to the purchase order. If there's one, check is prepared by the accounts payable clerk. Okay, how about signatures? Checks are printed on a printer outside of Rob's office. Well, what if someone steals a check? Checks over 5,000 require both Rob and Donald signatures. Under 5,000 by Rob only. Donald keeps a stamp with his administrative assistant in case he's unavailable for checks that need to be signed. Okay, other problems. And for any check over $50,000, they require supporting documentation. So obviously there's so many like WIRs like for us to kind of work on here, right? So if I flip back here, there's so many different, internal control weaknesses that we can like populate here, right? So for example, just to kind of show you one of them, no price list, right? Salespeople set credit, right? No tracking of time for non-custom orders. You kind of get it, right? And then the implication, the recommendation, all that stuff kind of gets added onto there, right? So here we have basically this whole part figured out. And if we continue scrolling through the case, we get to this stage, and then we've got some, these website development costs. So obviously there's some development assets. So we're just going to go in and kind of throw those in. That's going to be our final area. So website development costs is going to be here. Okay. And this pretty much takes us to this particular stage where at this point now we have to kind of make a decision about what we do with this audit. So remember, we're doing a whole audit here. So we have risks. We have probably an approach. So we're going to try to do RAMP here, right? For an audit, for a plan. So we're going to go approach, materiality, risks, right? You see what I'm doing here? I'm trying to find some kind of a way to kind of keep track of all this information. And then later on, all the procedures, the internal controls, and all the FR stuff. So now you can actually go in and, solve all this, okay? So I have done kind of the legwork for you, right? At least you kind of have like an idea of what this should look like. And what I now want you to do is actually try to practice writing, okay? So I've solved it as much as I can for you. My advice is now I'm going to upload this document, the one that I made. I'm going to make it available for all of you. And I encourage for you to attempt to try to use the information from it. Okay, sample computer outline. I encourage you to try to actually write the case now and then try to practice it yourself, okay? I've also uploaded the answer. It is available here. Please don't peek the answer until you've actually attempted the case. But my advice is, you can obviously see that this is a pretty complicated case. Try to time yourself, try to give yourself an opportunity, and I think you'll do quite well. And you'll be able to finish the majority of this case overall. But the key thing that I have for you is some of these cases are going to be really, really hard. So you got to find a way, you got to find an ability to, basically do better, okay? Practice, trying to put all this information down in the time provided. Make sure that you use that computer outline to actually jot down information. And I think you'll be pretty good to go for your exams. Okay. Let me just kind of jump ahead here, back to the slides. We're at the end of the presentation. I want to say thank you. Thanks for attending. Just a little bit more about Prep Formula. Again, we provide a unique, personalized one-on-one learning approach for core and elective modules along with the 2020 CFE. Please check out more of our information at prepformula.com. And if you're struggling with any exam that you're writing, please feel free to reach out to me. I would certainly be happy to help. Okay, and then let me know if there's any questions. Okay, I'll stick around for 2-3 minutes and then see if there's any questions, and then we'll disconnect for the evening. Okay, I'm getting a question already. How many internal controls issues is good enough? My advice is to aim for kind of 3 or 4 if you see an example like that. So I'd probably say 3 or 4 are probably ideal. Okay, that's what I would look at. Perfect. Okay, folks. Let me see if there's any other questions here. Also, by the way, thank you very much for attending the class today. I really appreciate all of you attending. This has been very, very great. And feel free to also connect with me anytime. I would certainly be happy to, help in any way that I can before your exam. So I'm going to leave my email contact information. Please definitely reach out if you need anything at all. And best of luck with with your upcoming exam. I think you'll do great. So try to practice the question, and I think it should definitely help you. Okay. I think that's it for this evening. Definitely do reach out if there's any other questions, and also please don't forget to rate the session. We always collect feedback about how we do webinars, and I would greatly appreciate if you could provide a rating. Again, thank you, folks. Thanks, and hope you have a wonderful evening.